We just saw Justice League. Lewis.
I'm mad.
Oh my God.
Biggest DC fan I know. It was amazing. It was. Oh my God. Well, I'm crying.
I bet you are.
It was everything I wanted. Oh my God.
You'll find out my thoughts later.
And later is now, as what is up everybody, Random Man here, bringing you my review for the highly anticipated, wait for it, Justice League. By the way, there will be no spoilers in this review. You're all safe, as the plot basically follows our title superhero team as they come together to honor the fallen Superman, played by Henry Cavill, to save the planet from the catastrophic threat of Steppenwolf, played by Kieran Hines, and his army of parademons. Going into this movie, I had a lot of thoughts running through my head in terms of what I was expecting with this film. On a basic level, I was cautiously optimistic to see it. On a more complex level, that cautious optimism was stemming off of my thoughts on the previous DCEU movies. And to quickly run down my takes on those films, Man of Steel was not an amazing start to this franchise. I think it is a decent watch, though there are quite a few things to admire about it. Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, whether you're looking at the theatrical or extended cuts, is a bloated mess, and by contrast, Suicide Squad is an empty mess. However, earlier this year, I really enjoyed Wonder Woman. This is definitely the best DCEU movie we've gotten thus far, my favorite for sure, and it had a glimmer of hope with it that the rest of the DCEU would follow suit. But we also have to keep in mind that this movie is directed again by Zack Snyder, who previously helmed the first two entries in the DCEU. But there was also other underlying circumstances with the production of this movie, as Zack Snyder had to step down from the post-production of this film to go with his family after the tragic loss of his daughter Autumn committing suicide. My condolences went out to him and his family upon hearing the news, and director Joss Whedon, who co-wrote the screenplay, was called in to take over post-production duties. This is the guy who directed the first two Avengers movies, and speaking of superhero teams and films, it's also shocking to see that this is the first live-action theatrical film that we have gotten that features the Justice League coming together on the big screen. I mean, this team, this superhero team from DC Comics, predates the Avengers and the X-Men, which that's saying something because both of those franchises have had quite a few of their movies of their own. Plus, I was excited that I saw this movie with a longtime friend of mine, Lewis, who you saw in the intro of this video from my Snapchat story. I was so honored that he invited me to come with him to see this movie that he had a lot of anticipation for. I was actually supposed to see this movie early too with Lewis, as he snagged free early fan screening passes to see this movie, and we were gonna see it last Saturday, but it was his fault that he screwed up the date and the screening was really on Monday. Yeah, that was your fault, bro. We saw Murder on the Orient Express instead. That was my previous review. When we got to the screening on Monday, though, this occurred.
I'm so mad.
So guess what happened? We couldn't see Justice League
so
tonight.
Mad.
We got complimentary tickets for whenever, but
yeah. We were literally the first two people cut off from seeing this movie early Monday night. So frustrating. But like I've said in that Snapchat story, we each got reimbursement passes. We were able to see this movie Thursday night, 6 p.m. So last night, as I'm recording this review, in 70mm and with our ticket orders, we each got one of these awesome posters in the mail. I think this is a really, really cool looking poster in my opinion. So yeah, I'm digressing way too much at this point. Bottom line, I was cautiously optimistic to see this movie, so let's get on with my thoughts. I can already tell this review is going to be long as hell. Starting out with the cast and their performances, there are a shit ton of players to talk about with this ensemble list of performers. Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne / Batman. I've always liked him in the role. He was strong in Batman vs. Superman, and in this movie, he does as good of a job here. He is badass, and he acts like the Iron Man / Nick Fury of the DCEU, and going around having all the gadgets, being rich, and recruiting some of these players. So I really like Affleck here. Henry Cavill as Kal-El / Clark Kent / Superman. I think it is an understatement to say that it was a really badly kept secret that he is in this movie, but without spoiling much, what we do see of Superman here is the best of what we've seen from him in the DCEU. I thought Cavill's performance was fantastic for the screen time that he did have. Gal Gadot as Diana Prince / Wonder Woman. Love her. Loved her in Batman vs. Superman. Loved her in Wonder Woman. I also love her here. Ezra Miller as Barry Allen / The Flash. He is one of the new players here. And to me, he is the standout of this movie. Definitely of the new players, because he is very naive, very quirky. He is portrayed as a loner in this movie, but he has a lot of awkward humor that rubs off mostly pretty well in this movie, and I love the visual effects that are attributed with him. I loved him in The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and a lot of that charisma was laid onto his performance here. We have Jason Momoa as Arthur Curry / Aquaman. He, to me, was the odd one out of the Justice League. That's not to say that I didn't like his performance. I dug the surfer dude kind of bro approach to his character, not making him look like a pussy as he did in the comics and other incarnations. I liked his look all shredded and filled with tattoos. He just got the least amount of interesting development out of the new players here, but I did like his role. Ray Fisher as Victor Stone / Cyborg really surprised me for how much I enjoyed his character and performance. I originally knew Cyborg from the cartoon adaptation of the Teen Titans back in the early 2000s, but clearly the DCEU is taking inspiration from other incarnations of the comics, as here he is a part of the Justice League. Like I've said, Ray Fisher surprised me as this character because I thought he was going to be distracting for being a walking CGI model essentially. But not only did I think the CGI on him was convincing, but his performance was really integral to the plot of the movie. I thought he was especially strong. There's just a lot of other people in this movie too. Some people are cut that were previously announced to be in this movie, but I'll get to that later. But of the performances, for the most part, I think everyone here did good jobs for what they were given. Moving on to the writing and the script. Like I said before, this movie is co-written by Joss Whedon and Chris Terrio. This movie, the way it is set up by these writers, kind of had my worries coming true for what the movie was doing and approaching its narrative. To me, a lot of things were happening in the first section of this movie that took me kind of off guard. I mean, we get to see some of the new members of the Justice League coming together, but we also get a spew pile of exposition involving the villain of this movie, Steppenwolf, and the MacGuffins of this movie, three of them being the mother boxes that Steppenwolf wants to obtain so that he can take over the world and whatever. So it was moving faster than I had initially expected. Some of this does have to do with the direction. I mean, it is noticeable where some of the movie was reshot by Joss Whedon, but also some of the stuff that was kept intact by Zack Snyder. And going to the pacing again, yeah, it felt like it was moving at an erratic pace for some of the first moments of the movie. I am well aware that this movie was mandated by its studio, Warner Brothers, to run at 2 hours or less. This movie runs at 1 hour and 59 minutes, barely under 2 hours, including all of its end credits. By the way, stay for the mid and end credit sequences. The mid end credit scene is funny, and then the very last end credit scene will have DC Comics fans shitting their pants. But anyway, yeah, with this approach, it's pretty noticeable with this unstable pace the movie was going at that this film was supposed to be longer. I think it was supposed to be like 2 hours and 45 minutes or 3 hours, with stuff significantly being cut along with other characters. And for the complaints I've had in the past for these movies running too long, I surprisingly want to see what this movie would have been if it had run longer. That being said, though, the co-direction that is appearing on screen from Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon, I thought was adequate for the most part. Seeing how these characters do come together, even if some of the new members get more development than others, when I see these characters coming together, it brought a lot of joy in seeing these characters bounce off of each other really, really well. The dialogue and the interactions between the characters had some humor to them, notably from Ezra Miller's The Flash. I loved seeing him deliver some of the humor. Not all of it hit, but that's just the nature of comedy. But there were dramatic moments here too that I felt had some heft. When they came, they were very few and far between, and they weren't some of the best dramatic moments I've ever seen in movies, but they felt fine for what the movie had. When the action does ensue with all of these guys coming together, it is really fun. I think that it is entertaining to see throughout, even though it does go into some issues with the look of the movie as well. There's a lot more color and a lighthearted tone interjected with this movie, but in some notable moments, the VFX had a tendency to look dodgy at times. I thought Cyborg was going to be a problem to be a walking CGI model, but it was the backgrounds a lot of the time that stuck out like sore thumbs. It looked awkward for some of the characters to be placed in front of them, as it was obvious that it was a blue or green screen digitized in inserts all over the film. Some of the editing had a tendency to be kind of spotty also, some character movements, but at certain points, the movie does look gorgeous. When the final showdown does happen, there's a huge shade of red over the area in northern Russia after Chernobyl, where these characters are fighting Stephen Wolf and his parademons. And also mentioning the visual effects, it's noticeable that when Superman does show up in this movie, his top lip and mustache region didn't quite look right. It's been known that he was under contract by Paramount Pictures to keep his mustache while shooting Mission Impossible 6. So for Justice League and the reshoots, Warner Brothers had to digitize that thing out. They should have just gone with the Cesar Romero approach and cake on a lot of makeup like Romero did with his Joker. But anyway, speaking of Superman, without spoiling anything else, going back to some of the writing, I think that his integration was suitably done. It had something to do with what happened in Batman vs. Superman on a similar note, but I thought it was less ludicrously done here and more believable. And then, yeah, again, some of his visuals didn't look all that right. Overall, the visuals are just hit or miss. I really liked Danny Elfman's film score. He is, of course, known for some of his iconic orchestral scores, like with 1989's Batman and 2002's Spider-Man. And what he did here, he not only was able to integrate stuff like the 1989 Batman theme into this film, but have some creative ventures with how the music was put in play. The cinematography mostly stayed sufficient. Like I said, I saw this movie in 70mm and it looked fine there, but like the screen was definitely bigger, but there were black bars on the side of my showing. So I would see it in a regular theater, or if you can, just go with an AMC Dolby Cinema, because the sound is gonna boom, as I think the sound design and mixing and everything coming together with some of the good visual effects with the action make a sensory experience that is, again, fun. Even in between all of that, though, we did have to deal with another problem that does plague superhero movies today, not just with the DCEU and the MCU, but with a lot of other ones too. It's the villain. Kieran Hines as Steppenwolf is so weak in this movie. Just bland, forgettable, one-dimensional with his motivations to take over the world, as we see in a bunch of other films like these in the past. It seems like I have been going back and forth constantly with this movie in what I thought. And to tell the truth, I was debating with myself and with my friend Lewis as to, the handle of what my opinion is for this flick. To talk about Lewis's thoughts, he went crazy for this movie for sure. Again, biggest DC fan I know, and he got what he wanted to see, as he was amazed to see his beloved characters that he's grown attached to since his youth be put on the big screen. And I loved experiencing that with him. And I'm not just saying that because I've known you for a long time, man. Love you, Lewis. Love you, bro. Real OG since kindergarten 15 years ago. That's how long we've known each other. But yeah, just talking with him also after the movie, he gave me a lot of clarification on the comic book lore and other stuff that is hinted at with some Easter eggs and decisions that they've made with the narrative of this movie, because he has been a fan of the DCEU so far for the most part. For me, I'm almost the opposite of him, as I wanted to view this as a movie. I did notice some stuff from my youth that goes into what I enjoyed about this movie for sure. And thinking about it more and more, I had a night to think about this movie before I even started this review, and I would say that this movie is kind of like a really good episode of a DC animated cartoon, like one where Bruce Timm and Paul Dini had involvement in. I also don't want that to come off as a backhanded compliment of sorts, or to undermine what strengths I felt this movie does have, because it did feel kind of TV-esque in the feel of how much entertainment was going on, but also at the cost of this movie being kind of generic in what the plot was going for, because again, how thin it was, villain motivations, all the heroes coming together, that kind of thing. But within all this too, I have to give credit to the filmmakers involved for trying to get this thing made, even with a lot of things coming in front of it or literally behind the camera. What got me to like this movie in the end was the characters. I love the characters coming together, not just the actors and me liking the actors, but them coming together in a context of what I feel reminding me of a Saturday morning cartoon. And just seeing all of this come into play for the first time not only made me feel like Lewis and him watching his beloved characters come to life, but just seeing something that I do prefer the DCEU to go in the direction that they're trying to go for, because I think that this is not necessarily a course correct for the series, but more like a step in the right direction. I shouldn't say step, actually, like a turn in the right direction. And that's why I brought up Lewis throughout this review and the Snapchat story as the intro for this review, because I wanted to be able to showcase what one superfan felt about this film, and what me, a casual fan of sorts, and someone who also views movies as movies to try to enjoy them and watch them and even get some deeper meaning out of them, to see a film that does have a lot going for it and is supposed to be one of these huge event movies. At its core, it doesn't have the same oomph or same impact factor as I would like it to be. It is flawed, but fun. I personally found it to be fun. I found it to be an enjoyable time. I do look forward to what this franchise has in store for these characters and just other solo movies and other team-up movies, like 5 of them or so planned for the future. And this is where I get into how I would go about talking about this movie for those intending to see it or not, as I am recommending this movie 3 different ways. The first way is for those who have not been a fan of the DCEU thus far. I would stay away from this movie. There's not going to be a lot in here that's going to make you turn around and say that you're a big fan of this franchise instantly. I don't think that will be the case. Just don't waste your time with this film. The second way would be is if you were cautiously optimistic for this franchise, like me going into this film, keep that open mind and you may find some enjoyment with it. And the third way would be Lewis's way of recommending the movie for sure. Like if you're a big DC, Justice League, whatever, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman fan, you're gonna dig the hell out of this movie. And also if you were a fan of the DCEU thus far, you're gonna have a fun time. You're gonna see this movie. You've probably seen it already by now. For me though, coming back to me and wrapping up this review as I've talked long enough, as this has been a difficult review for me to get out there, I recommend Justice League. My final verdict for Justice League is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Justice League. Please keep the comments as spoiler-free as I've kept this review. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.